welcome to Share Truth Apply Scripture. I'm Jordan Shambly, joined by Cedra Sarton and Hannah Harrison is with us today in the studio. We're actually continuing our discussion from last week.
Yeah, so if you didn't hear last week's discussion, I highly recommend you go back and you listen to that. It's on the podcast.
Where can they find that?
EngageMagazine.net.
Yeah.
All our stuff is there.
Yeah,
Everything
exactly.
is there. So you can listen to us. We post it on YouTube. We also have our own podcast page. It's on Spotify as well.
Yeah, we're on Spotify now. That was kind of a recent development. Yeah, so if you like to listen to podcasts on Spotify, look us up, Share Truth Apply Scripture.
Go to Engage.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Go to EngageMagazine.net where you can find everything. You can even read articles by our friend Hannah, who is one of the newer additions to AFA, American Family Association. But I'm sure if you're listening to AFR, you probably know.
Yeah, no introduction is necessary.
Yeah, anyways.
So
let's get into this topic.
We're continuing our discussion from last week about sexual abuse in the church. And there's a lot of layers to this.
Yeah. I'll go ahead and say the disclaimer again.
Yeah, exactly.
You have small children. If you've got tiny ears listening, you might want to wait and listen to the podcast later alone without them, because this is a dark,
unless you want to start having conversations now.
Yeah,
which might not be a bad idea.
Yeah.
Just so you're kind of aware. But I do agree. Yes.
I do think that is something as a parent you probably should
have that on your own terms.
Have that and not not through
Just
us.
keep in mind.
Yeah. So that being said, and I'm hoping your children are scurrying back to their bedrooms to play. We're going to continue this discussion. We're going to talk this segment about signs. Maybe there's warning signs that you can be sensitive to as you're living and as you're fellowshipping in your church. When you notice there's something wrong, and we're going to talk about sometime in this episode also how to deal with that.
Yeah, and we're not wanting to create a sense of paranoia.
No.
No. I don't want you walking around just looking over your shoulder scared all the time.
Yeah.
But be open to the fact, like, you see something odd and you feel like something is off with somebody.
It's like, see something, say something type.
Yeah.
You know?
I mean, don't just kind of brush it away. I mean, you don't want to be just because someone may be strange and immediately accuse them of, I think they're abusing people. But you do want to keep your eyes open and maybe even mention it to, like, if your church has a security team or somebody looking out.
Right, and that's something that we'll get into later as well.
Just go ahead. Yeah, so we'll get more into that, but.
Yeah, and so we're going to talk about all of that right now. So, like I said, I mentioned in the previous episode, my church went through something very similar to this. There was no fault of the leadership at all. The leadership was not involved. But there was a family in the congregation that this situation happened, and what I learned from that was that everyone in the church is affected, because a person that you believed had a healthy walk with the Lord and was admired by people and sought after for advice and stuff. There was a lot of darkness in their life, and there was a victim, and it was a very tragic happening for the entire church, not and especially for the victim. And so, that being said, this is not something that should be treated as if only a few people are really affected and you can kind of go on your merry way and kind of like close your ears and close your eyes. This is something that if you're a part of the body, you're going to feel the pain as well. And so we want to be aware of the warning signs maybe, so that we can help prevent some things. So Hannah, why don't you unpack some of these things that we should be on the lookout for, or at least should be sensitive to?
Right. Okay. Yeah, and also on that, you have to keep in mind as well, we talked about how it affects everyone.
Yeah.
It obviously is going to affect the victim, the church body, and all of that, but it also affects the family. Say it was a younger sibling, something along that side, there's just a whole new realm of hurt and distress, maybe. But a lot of several things you can look for. I think the most important is going to be the anxiety and the emotional behavioral issues that you're going to start seeing, because as we mentioned in the last week's show, a lot of the times victims know their abuser more than likely, especially in this kind of setting, they're going to know and have a relationship. So we don't know what this person has told the child. We don't know if it was something along the lines of, you'll ruin my ministry, you'll ruin my relationships, you'll ruin where I'm at in the church. You don't know if they've said, if you tell, I'll hurt you. If you tell, I'll hurt your sisters or your brothers or your family. You don't know that. And so a lot of the times they don't know how to process it. And we touched that last time, but it's something when you don't know how to process this, and I'm a stressed person, I know I just get mad and I'm frustrated and I don't know what to do. But when children are holding that kind of weight, a lot of the times they may be depressed and they might clam up and, I don't want to go to church. Or they go to church and they're throwing fits. I don't want to go to Sunday school. Don't make me go, Mom. That kind of stuff.
Wow.
And you think a lot of the times, and maybe I know several children who just don't want to leave their parents, which is that's a real thing.
Yeah.
But sometimes you just have to be careful and notice the signs around and at home, kind of what's happening, maybe behind closed doors with your child and with these children, because it can be just a frustrating phase, but sometimes there could be a deeper root.
There could be a reason.
And
you
want to listen to that. And even if that's not in the church setting, a lot of the stuff applies just in general. Sexual abuse happens to children, unfortunately, whether you're in the church or not in the church. And that's just something that I think is a big key sign in realizing the deeper. root.
You just notice that there's a child that maybe even around someone that they used to love, if they seem to kind of off and they don't want to be near that person.
Right. Distance.
Or, if you just notice any kind of behavior in a child that they did not have before, I mean, and if it's something happened, it'll usually be like, I think, a switch. Like the next time you see them, all of a sudden they're acting strange. I mean, you got to watch that.
And also, too, a lot of people who have a lot of the abusers that had this mindset, they don't do it once and are done. So it could be a long period of time. And even then, like what you're saying, it could continue and just get closed darker. And then they're just more withdrawn from what's happening around them. And that's something that you want to keep in mind as well.
Yeah.
And I think if you're looking at it happening to someone older, this goes back to what we said last week, talking about building those deeper relationships with other church members and stuff, and being at the point where if all of a sudden someone stops coming to church or something like that, you can call them up and talk to them, ask them what's going on. So like that's notice those types of things.
Yeah, and this is where things like I find small groups and in church fellowship is very useful too. And too often, and this is true for me, I can use those as sort of like building shallow friendships. And so like kind of the how are you today, I'm great, and just talk small talk and stuff, and never go past just the surface level things. And I say that to my own shame. I do feel like that is a command, that a part of using the means of grace, and the means of grace being prayer, the scripture, listening to preaching, but also fellowshipping with other believers. I feel like a part of that is really is connecting with each other and sharpening each other's iron sharpens iron. And when you're in that space with someone relationally, and you can really notice when things are off. And it takes everyone to do this. It takes everyone to do this. It's very much a body a situation. And so I think one of the main takeaway from like how to be sensitive to all these things is to be connected with everyone. And I mean, into at least if you're unable to actually have a personal friendship with everyone in the church, and I know that's impossible, especially for me as an introvert, then to set
church is just too big.
The church is just too big, but there are ways to organize and to set up networks and ways of providing an environment of fellowship. So maybe you can take it upon yourself, talk to your elders and your pastor, to set up accountability groups.
And we'll go more into that type thing in the next segment, but
right, exactly.
Going back to looking at signs, we've talked about looking for signs of someone who's been abused, but what if we're looking for signs of someone who could possibly be an abuser,
Mm-hmm.
like someone who's
Oof.
displaying
That's
odd behavior or things like that. You know, I watched a video. It was just like one of those Facebook videos that someone put up. And I cannot remember her name, but I don't really know anything else about her. But she was discussing a gentleman that she had watched in her church. You've watched that video
I think
too.
I shared it. Yeah.
Yeah, you shared it.
Yeah.
That's where I saw it at.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
But it was such a like an eye-opening thing about it is not rude to confront somebody
It's not.
who is displaying behavior. And so she had seen this person, and she counsels people. This particular lady counsels people who's been through this, so she knows these signs. And so she had noticed this gentleman conversing with children who he wasn't connected
Right.
with
Yeah.
anybody else in the church. So he'd come in, but he was conversing with people's children, people he did not know,
Mm-hmm.
and like waiting outside the restroom and talking to them as they came in and out, which is very uncomfortable. And it really struck her when she was sitting eating a meal with one of her children, and he came by and started talking to him, and he was ignoring adults and not speaking to them. So I mean, like, there are things like that. That doesn't you don't always look at someone, they may be odd. That doesn't necessarily mean that they're going to hurt somebody,
Right.
but the signs are there that they possibly could, and that's something like you want to keep your eye on.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
Yeah. And we don't want to create fear
Yeah,
necessarily.
no.
We don't want you.
Yeah.
We don't want you.
But I think
looking-
that it is important to be aware.
Yeah, absolutely.
You know, aware that this stuff happens, but also to be aware at what's happening around you, because nobody knows you better than you know you.
Right, yeah.
And your family and who is influencing your family.
Yeah.
And so, like Cedra said in that scenario, you know, if somebody's kind of making you feel uncomfortable, and that woman, she went and she talked to the man. She said, I don't know you. Do I know you?
Right.
Have
Yeah.
you been here before? How do you know my children? And the man still just kind of shut off, and he was like, you're being rude to me. You know,
Wow.
kind of even more, okay, yeah, I'm really not comfortable with you
Yeah.
now. You know, I'm
Yeah.
trying to have a conversation with you, and you're shutting down. So I think it is important that you are aware when people like that come in, and especially when they're talking to your kids.
And if somebody just gives you that vibe, I've had that happen before. In a church that I attended for a short period of time, where someone came in and he seemed like a nice guy, but then he started kind of giving just that vibe.
Yeah.
And it was a small church, so it was easy.
Yeah.
It was
Right.
Easier to handle.
And,
Yeah.
and I do think that the Lord gives us discernment.
Yeah.
And I think, you know, sometimes you have that check in your spirit where it's kind of like, oh, I don't know. You know, not necessarily that you're judging, because I'm quick. I unfortunately have judged before. But I think you just are aware sometimes.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. And we're going to go into, in the next segment, how we can do better at making sure that these things don't happen. So stay tuned for the next segment, and we'll see you there.